Hey everybody, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Durling. Thanks once again for watching. On this episode, I am going to count down my top 10 favorite live albums from the 1990s. And when I put this together, I was careful not to pick albums that came out, between 1990 and 1999 that were archival. So there are some great albums that were released in the 90s that contain older concerts, and a couple that come to mind are the April Wine King Biscuit Flower Hour album that came out in 1999, but that's a 1982 show. It's a fantastic show, but doesn't really fit. And archival, that's almost its own episode, so stay tuned for that. These are my rankings today. Some of these were easy to pick, some of them I wasn't sure where to put them, but these are my top 10 live albums to come out during the 1990s. Number 10, a band that's done lots of live albums. This was their first full-length live album. They had Live at the Marquee in 93, but in 1998, Dream Theater released this album, Once in a Lifetime. And a really cool cover. And this, of course, was recorded on the Falling into Infinity tour, but it's got a great mix of old and new songs. And it shows how Dream Theater could just stop on a dime and start playing something else. A couple of my favorite moments are actually when they bust into other people's songs. At the end of Take the Time, out of nowhere, they start playing the end of Freebird from Lynyrd Skynyrd, and they do it so well. You would never think in a million years that a prog band would play like a Southern rock anthem like that, but they do, and it sounds really, really cool. This is when Derek Sherinian was still in the band on keyboards too. And during Peruvian Skies, which is one of my favorite Dream Theater songs, just for a second they go into Enter Sandman from Metallica, and so it's just all good. The soloing is amazing, and the band was just on fire at this point. This was the last thing that came out before Scenes from a Memory. So I actually like the Falling into Infinity album, but I know this wasn't a good period for the band. But they did a good job at on tour. The consummate professionals. Actually, this tour was one of the few times that Dream Theater actually came anywhere close to where I live. They were on a triple bill with Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Deep Purple. Deep Purple were the headliners. Now, I'm not a big ELP fan. Well, I'm not an ELP fan at all, really. But I like Deep Purple and love Dream Theater, but I couldn't get anybody to go with me. So, womp womp. That's my number 10. Number 9, the 90s, there were so many unplugged albums. It got to be such a cliche, but some bands came through, and in some cases laddered after the initial sort of euphoria had faded with some really good unplugged albums. This one kind of flew under the radar because it's a band that was flying under the radar in the 90s, Dokken. This is called One Live Night, was recorded in Japan, and this is actually an import version that came out before the album was released domestically. It's the well-known Dokken lineup. They were still together at this point, and they all sound really, really good here. Don was singing well, and these songs sound really, really well stripped down. What I like, too, it's got stuff from Dysfunctional, which was their 95 album, which I absolutely love. So they do The Maze and Nothing Left to Say. And actually, believe it or not, speaking of ELP, they did a version of From the Beginning on Dysfunctional, and they do it on here. And since that's an acoustic song to begin with, it sounds really good on here. And that version actually got some airplay. I can remember hearing the version of From the Beginning from this album on pop radio. It wasn't a hit or anything, but I just remember thinking, that is so weird. So that's my number 9. Number 8, I had to talk about this album because nobody ever talks about this lineup, and I'm a big fan. Bad Company. What you hear is what you get. It's one of those confusing song titles, It's like you get what you play for. It's one of those. But anyway, this came out, was unassumingly in 1993 on Atlantic, and this is the Brian Howe-led lineup of Bad Company, of course. And I like that lineup, but it's pretty much a Bad Company greatest hits. And Brian Howe sounds fine singing the Paul Rogers material. So, you've got Rock and Roll Fantasy, and you've got Ready for Love, Shooting Star, Can't Get Enough, Bad Company, Good Lovin' Gone Bad. It's good stuff, but you've also got Holy Water, and How About That, and If You Needed Somebody, and Here Comes Trouble, No Smoke Without a Fire. And Brian Howe was, at least, the concerts recorded here, I never saw them live, but he sounded fantastic. He hit all those high notes. This is a great lineup that even Simon Kirke and Mick Ralphs disown, which is ridiculous, I think, and it's a shame, but this is a great album, and if you like this lineup, have never heard it, do yourself a favor, because it's a great snapshot of the band on the Here Comes Trouble tour, and also you hear how well Brian Howe delivered the classic Bad Company material. It didn't sound odd or out of place, and to be quite honest, since he had such a higher range than Paul Rodgers, it probably gave his throat a rest, but he sounds good singing it. There's, it doesn't sound weird. And number 7, overlooked band. They just came out with a good new album this year, really good album. I reviewed it when it first came out, called Chasing Euphoria, but this is Harem Scarum live in Japan. Japan took to these guys right away. Unfortunately, they were never as popular here in Canada, where they're from, as they were in other pockets of the world. But this is a single disc live album that came out in 1996 on WEA. And it's just highlights of the first 3 albums. The band sounds really, really good. It's got a couple new studio tracks on the end of it, but yeah, these guys just, whatever they did in the studio, they were able to reproduce live. And in the studio, if you know anything about Harem Scarum, there's the stacked backing vocals and rhythm guitars, but you don't notice it missing. They just cover all the bases really, really well. Just a great band. Number 6. I almost forget this is, you forget about live albums, because this was sort of an event when it came out, because initially this came out as a box set with a CD and a VHS, and of course it was later reissued on DVD and a standalone CD. This is Queensryche Operation Live Crime. So this came out in 1991 originally on EMI. This is a 2001 reissue. It's actually Japanese. Queensryche, of course, in 91 had become a headline act because Empire was such a big album. So they did something very cool. They went back, and because Operation Mindcrime was their first gold album, they went back and performed it in their entirety during the Empire tour. They selected part of the tour, the show, to be the Operation Mindcrime portion of it. And watching this home video is actually what got me into Queensryche, because they were just on fire during this period. Now this reissue adds a couple of songs from the same time period, but not from Operation Mindcrime. They do The Lady Wore Black and Roads to Madness. But yeah, it just reminds me, do not forget, I don't know if it's still available or not, but I interviewed Brian Heaton, one of the authors of Roads to Madness, which is the complete Queensryche touring history through from 81 to 97. This just makes me think of talking to him about how just probably one of the best, highest performing bands, highest level bands in the world Queensryche were during this time period. And it's a great book if you're a Queensryche fan. Going into the top 5, these ones are kind of predictable, but people that are fans of this show and know who my favorite bands are, you might be surprised at some of the titles that are missing. In some cases, it's because the band didn't do a live album during this period that I'm covering, and in other cases, they did live albums, but I didn't think they were all that great. One huge example, I'm never really been the biggest fan of Van Halen's Right Here, Right Now, because, and that's before I heard about all the having to re-record the vocals and all of that stuff. I never ever listened to it, even though it plays like a greatest hits. I always just preferred listening to the studio albums. So that's an example of one you'd think that I might be talking about, because it came out in 93. That's not here. 97. I got to give a shout out to Night Ranger. Got my Sing Me Away book out now. Link to my books will be below here. And this is Rock in Japan, Greatest Hits Live. This has been released under a few different titles, but this is the Japanese version on Deadline Records. This was recorded during the band's reunion tour, and they were in support of the Neverland album. And I'm happy to say that not only does the band sound fantastic, but they do 6 songs from Neverland. So they were still in that mode. Bands in general were still in that mode of promoting their new music instead of playing one or two songs or maybe no songs from the new album and just doing the catalog stuff. So really, really good, solid live album. I almost went with the 1990 Live in Japan, then I realized that was all recorded in 88. Number 4, another, it was less an album, more of a big deal when this originally came out in 93. Metallica, Binge and Purge. This originally came, as people know, it came in a huge, like, miniature road case. It came with, double CD, but it also came with a couple of VHS tapes. It was really, really expensive, and I never bought it back in the day. I've got the blackened reissue here, which they shrunk down very nicely. But some of this was recorded on the And Justice for All tour, but mostly this was recorded on the Black Album tour. So I think you've got Mexico City and San Diego from the Black Album tour, which is when, it was so huge. The tour went on and on and on. Yeah, that's right. Mexico City is from February, March 93, and San Diego's from January 92. And then you've got a good show from Seattle from August 89 from the And Justice for All tour. But, they were taking over the world, and, they had the pit, they had the Snake Pit, they do the band members would switch instruments, and they had Jason singing Whiplash, and they were just, this was it, right? This was Metallica taking over the world, right? Anyway, I had to mention this because it's just a really cool. The shows sound great, but it's just the packaging, even on the reissue version, is really cool. My number 3, released in 1998. Rush, Different Stages. Actually, this isn't the complete live album. This is a sampler disc that has 9 songs that span the 3 discs that made up this album. Now, the 3rd disc was an archival CD from the Farewell to Kings tour, but discs 1 and 2 were all recorded either on the Counterparts tour or the Test for Echo tour. And the band sounds great, and it's a great set list. They're doing things like the Analog Kid. It's the first time, I'm pretty sure that was the first time on an album there was official live version of Limelight, which seems odd. And of course, Rush fans know that when this album came out, we thought that might be the last thing that Rush ever did. We didn't know if Neil Peart was going to return to the band, so I listened to that album all the time and was just like, it was really good, but at the same time it was melancholy because you thought, man, what a sad end to things, right? Fortunately, we, Rush, Neil came back, and we got so many more great albums and years out of that band. Number 2, you're probably thinking it's down to 1 or 2 now, right? Y&T, Yesterday and Today Live. This was recorded on what was supposed to be their farewell tour at the end of 1990, because they did regroup a few years later. This is actually the reissued version, which Ches and I reviewed when it came out. Metal Blade put this out a couple years ago. But this was one of the best Y&T lineups. They had Steph Burns and Jimmy DeGrasso. And it sounds so good, and it sounds so live. And the only regret I have about it would have been so cool if they had filmed this and put this out on home video too. But hey, it's great. It's fantastic. And the reissue restores a couple of tracks that they did during those shows, but they put them at the end. They did Earthshaker and Rescue Me. But it's a pretty career-spanning album at the time. The only thing there's no songs from Down for the Count on here. Other than that, every album that they had done to this point is covered. Highly can't recommend it enough. This is one of the few live albums I'd actually say if you want to get into Y&T, listen to this. I'd almost never recommend a live album for a first album purchase from anyone, but this is a pretty good indication of what they sound like. And my number 1, I always knew this would be the number 1 because this was significant for me because this was my entry point into this band. I was fairly late getting into this, and I have to thank my good friends Matt and Bobby for just coming at me with this band, knowing what else I liked, and saying, "Man, you got to hear some more of this band." Repeated plays of Kiss Alive 3 convinced me to get into Kiss. I had never bought any Kiss albums before, but I heard this album. It had a lot of the Kiss songs that I kind of liked anyway, all in one place. And again, this is definitely, obviously not the original lineup, but like the Y&T, the Eric Singer, Bruce Kulick lineup was so good, and they could handle anything from the catalog. And this is pretty career spanning too. I know this album inside out. It's always been one of my favorite live albums ever. So it was a foregone conclusion. It would be my absolute favorite live album from the 1990s. Now, what I'd like to know is, what are your favorite albums from the 1990s? Let's hear about that in the comments. And hope you enjoyed watching this. Reach out if you if you got any suggestions for future episodes. And I do want to say that for me promoting my books, without an agent or anything, if any of you out there have a show, have a channel, or know of a channel that maybe I'm not aware of that would be into this type of thing, let me know. I'm all for it. If you'd like to have me on, I'd love to guest on one of your shows and talk about any of my books. My new one's Night Ranger, but to talk about any of them, really. That's the shameless plug. Anyway, don't forget to hit subscribe, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks for watching Tim's Vinyl Confessions.